Sanders. The legend. Oh, good to see you, sir. Big honor. Big honor. Wow. I am so happy to see you, and I have to say, I was surprised you've got a new political advisor, Cardi B. Cardi B. She's out there sticking up for FDR. Were you surprised to hear Cardi B's in line with you with that?
Yes, and here's what the modern world is about. For 20 years, I've been fighting to strengthen Social Security, fighting to increase benefits, and she comes along and suddenly we get more attention in one day than I think I've gotten in 20 years.
Yeah.
Says something about the modern world.
Yeah, well, it's amazing how she said that if you want to make America great, FDR made America great because of Social Security, and then and you retweeted it. Listen, it's so amazing to me the way that young people relate to you. You are, you're young at heart. I wouldn't say that you're a young guy, and yet somehow
You wouldn't.
Not so much.
See, this discrimination that goes on.
Well, why is it that you have this tie with young people, and what can
I'll tell you why I think. Yeah. One time we did a rally during the campaign, and a lot of people there. At the end, we go down and shake a lot of hands, and some young man came up to me and he said, Bernie, what I like about you is you treat us like intelligent people. Yeah. All right? In other words, we live in a complicated world. And you know what? I cannot explain what's going on in 6-second sound bites, and I can't give you answers in a minute. So when I would give speeches, they'd be an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. And you know what, Van? Not a lot of people left. Because I think there is a hunger in this country for kind of an understanding of why we are where we are and how we go forward in a more positive way.
When I say you're young at heart, I really mean that. To me, you feel very, like you're still somehow very close to your initial inspiration, your kind of outrage against injustice, your belief in ordinary people. I think a lot of people don't know where that comes from. I think a lot of people don't know a big part of your father's family was actually wiped out in the Holocaust.
Sure. That is very definitely a part of my fabric and what makes me who I am. I never fully understood, to be honest with you, until rather recently. My father came from an area in Poland, where hunger was an issue. I mean, really, really poor people. And anti-Semitism was an issue, and there was a world war going on at that time. And all of that impacted him, which impacted me. And the other thing is he came to this country without a nickel, and he hadn't made any money. And we grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a 3.5-room, rent-controlled apartment. And the fact that our family, not that we were poor, but that money was always a struggle and always a source of tension between my parents. And I remember the arguments that took place. So I never forgot what it was like to be in a family which struggled financially.
Now, your dad is an immigrant, and there's so much anti-immigrant, nasty anti-immigrant stuff, but you're the son of an immigrant.
That's right.
Does that give you an ability to understand these dreamers?
It does. I wouldn't say understand, their situation is different, but to have great sympathy with them. I think, Van, and I just, a couple of years ago, went back to Poland with my brother to see where my father came from. And you think about it, it's easy to talk about it, but it's harder to really feel it. Here is a guy at the age of 17, leaving, didn't speak a word of English, no money. He had one brother here in the country at the time, would come a few years earlier. Think of the courage to come to a new country. And, that just overwhelmed me. So I see these kids, and I've been all over this country, kids who have come to this country at the age of 2 or 3, and we have this guy in the White House now who wants to throw them out of the only country that they have ever known. And that's just a horrific situation. We're going to fight as hard as we can for these young people.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned your brother, and the most emotional I've ever seen you was, and we got a video of this, when your brother at the Democratic Convention stands up and he starts speaking from his heart about your parents. And he starts speaking from his heart about you and what it meant. How did that feel, seeing your brother making that kind of a statement?
Well, it was, we came, as I said, from a family that never had any money. And in a million zillion years, my parents never would have dreamed that I'd become a United States Senator, let alone run for President of the United States. And that was what my brother was talking about. I love my brother very much.
Well, you know, you lost your parents young. You're in your early 20s. How did that impact you? I mean,
it was tough. My mom died when I was about 18, and my father 3 years later. And, you know, you're out on the world, kind of, but my brother was around, you know, so you kind of learn to stand on your own 2 feet, and it wasn't the easiest thing.
You know, I think a lot of people, you know, they look at you, they see somebody who has been consistent. I think one reason young people like you, they can go on YouTube and they can find you giving a speech in 1970, 1980, 1990, last week, and it's basically the same speech. You know, it's like,
see, I'm not very smart, but I am consistent.
Yeah, exactly. You don't spend a lot of money on speechwriters, man. It's like it's basically the same.
Wrote one speech and went a long way, right?
Exactly. So far, so good, sir. But you know, at the same time, of course, everybody does evolve. Everybody does. You know, what are some of the things that you, at this stage of your life, you know or understand or believe that maybe you didn't know in 1980 or 1990?
Well, look, I come from a small and beautiful state, state of Vermont, and I want to welcome and urge everybody to come and visit us. It is just beautiful, and we have great people. We are an overwhelmingly white state. And when you go around the country, you learn it is a beautiful country, physically, and wonderful, wonderful people all over this country. But you know what? There are a lot of people who have a lot of different issues.
That's right.
And I learned a lot during the campaign. So you know, we went into African-American communities and we sat down and we listened. To be very honest with you, I was not aware of the extent of police suppression in many communities and the anger that people felt, the fear that people felt against the police. That's not something that exists in Vermont. I learned a lot about the immigrant situation, and I will never forget, as long as I live, I was in Phoenix, young kids, teenage kids with tears rolling out of their eyes, worrying and telling, it's a constant worry that when they come home after school, whether their parents will still be there. How would you like to live with that one? So I learned a lot during the campaign, and as a result, you know, your position's not only involved, you just learn more and understand the problems better. But I'll tell you, Van, what I'm feeling very good about is that many of the ideas that I laid out during the campaign, which, as you will recall, you followed that campaign, were seemingly so radical. Yeah. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Oh, Bernie, you're nuts. We can't do that. Well, all over the country, people are now doing Medicare for all. Why isn't the United States joining every other major country on earth? Making public colleges and universities tuition-free. Making marijuana legal or decriminalizing marijuana. All of those ideas, which a few years ago seemed very radical, are now kind of mainstream.
Well, I want to get into all that stuff with you when we get back. We got so much to talk with Senator Bernie Sanders about, including an issue that doesn't get a lot of coverage but could have a big, big impact on Democrats' ability to win elections. Now, as we go to break, you know, I love to hear from you, and here's what you had to say to Bernie Sanders and what he's fighting for.
We need more universal health care. We need universal daycare. We need parental leave for everyone. We need free public education.
Bernie!
Welcome back to the Van Jones Show. I am talking to Senator Bernie Sanders. So now listen, there was a lot of questions that they have and other people have, but I want my questions first.
All right.
Okay, so
it's your show. You can have your questions.
I get some prerogatives around here. Look, I am thinking about the midterm elections. I don't hear us talking about, as Democrats, ideas as much as porn stars and Robert Mueller, et cetera. Is there a concern or a danger that we are in the biggest midterm election of our lives and we're not talking about the right stuff?
Absolutely. And, you know, that has been my criticism of media for way back when. We have a middle class which has been shrinking for 40 years. There's enormous pain out there. Everything being equal, the younger generation will have a lower standard of living than their parents. We have a climate change situation which is threatening the entire planet. You got 3 people in America who own more wealth than the bottom half, and the gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider. Those are the issues, it seems to me, that we should be spending a lot of time talking.
Why? I'm not talking about just the media. I mean, I talk to regular Democrats, people who are not on television. It's all impeachment all the time. Is that realistic? I mean,
it's bad. I think that is a mistake.
Why?
Look, I think, you know, the Mueller investigation will go where it goes. And I should say that if Trump fires Mueller, that is obstruction of justice. And to my mind, that is an impeachable offense. But I think ordinary Americans are out there and they're working 2 or 3 jobs. Kids are leaving school $40,000 in debt. People can't afford health care. They can't afford prescription drugs. They want us to deal with those issues. So, yes, I think you have to be taking on Trump's racism and his sexism and his homophobia. That you got to do. But most of our energy has got to be to bring people together around an agenda that speaks for the middle class and working families.
How do we thread this needle? Because on the one hand, you've got to appeal to some of those Trump voters who maybe have that economic pain. But some people are afraid now, if we go after too much of that, we're going to be putting those black women who are the backbone of this party on the back seat. I mean, how do you balance this out? This is a tough thing.
You help me on this one. This is what I think. It goes without saying that we have got to combat institutional racism and sexism and homophobia in every way that we can. We can't give Trump an inch on that. But on the other hand, whether you're a white working class guy in Kansas or a young African American in Brooklyn, New York, you know what? You want wages that you can live on. I talk about the working class. This is not white people. Over 50% of black workers in America make less than $15 an hour. Do you know what it would mean if we raised that minimum wage to $15 an hour? A huge wage increase for African American and Latino workers.
Well, you know, another issue that we don't talk about enough, I think, unions.
Yes.
The labor unions.
Absolutely.
And now, I did a little bit of my own research, and I want you to see what I found about labor unions and the vote. During the Industrial Revolution, the U.S. labor movement began to bring some power to working families. They got higher wages, better hours, and protection from unsafe working conditions like sweatshops. You like weekends? You like overtime pay? You can thank unions for that. The unionization rate peaked in 1954. Back then, more than 1/3 of wage and salary workers in the U.S. were in unions. Through collective bargaining, labor unions increased weekly earnings and they brought job security and benefits to workers, especially in manufacturing. And that helped to develop a strong middle class in America.
The middle class.
The middle class.
Middle class.
Unions built America's middle class.
Well, that was then. Recently, union membership has plummeted over the past 40 years to 20% in 1983 and less than 11% in 2017. There are a bunch of reasons for this. Corporations took factories overseas trying to find cheap workers. In manufacturing, they also turned to automation and robots. Jobs have also been growing in the service sectors, which often don't even have unions. Anti-labor critics say unions are too restrictive, charging members hefty dues, making it hard for companies to innovate or get rid of bad employees.
We won our battle against the big government union bosses.
I'm attacking the leadership of the union because they're greedy and they're selfish and self-interested.
28 states have passed right-to-work laws, which have been bolstered in recent years by Republicans.
What they're really talking about is giving you the right to work for less money.
These laws in the manufacturing strongholds like Michigan and Wisconsin delivered a real gut punch to organized labor in traditionally blue states. Many argue that the decline of union membership is also responsible for wage stagnation and increased income inequality in the U.S. You know, when I went up to Michigan and other places, it turned out that the labor unions had been stripped of a lot of their members, a lot of their money by some of these right-to-work laws. And I don't think that the Obama administration did enough to make sure that we built our labor unions when we had the opportunity. Did we miss an opportunity in the last administration to strengthen our unions?
Well, I think so. Some of us tried very, very hard. I think the fault lies with the extraordinary opposition we had from Republicans and from corporate America. And what I think everybody understands is that when workers come together and they sit down at the bargaining table and they collectively negotiate, they get better wages and they get better working conditions. They get better pensions and benefits. And by the way, and this is important, Van, this not only impacts unionized workers who get those benefits, But if you're a non-union worker and wages go up, your employer is going to have to match those wages. And the truth is that over the last 40 years or so, we have seen a decline in wages for millions of American workers. We have to rebuild that movement.
But I just say, though, the labor unions, they went to bat for Democrats. They fought hard for Democrats. They had a couple things that they wanted to get help on. They didn't get that help. Now, if you critique that, sometimes you run into the idea that you're being too tough on Obama. How do you handle that? Because you got in a little bit of trouble recently. You said something that sounded like it was halfway critical of Obama. People misheard it, got mad.
They didn't mishear it. It was intentionally.
Well, tell me about it.
I mean, it was, what I talked about was the fact that the business model, if you like, of the Democratic Party over the last 10 years has failed. And that is, instead of being a 50-state party, it's a 25-state party. Democratic Party has lost about 1,000 members of state legislatures throughout the country. Does that sound like a successful model to you? And what I said is that was disguised by the fact that we had a brilliant candidate who ran a great campaign in 2008. Obama got elected in 2012. And people said, well, that's great. But they forgot about what else was happening. That was my point.
The party was falling apart. People may hear that as being tough on Obama. It's another challenge, I think, inside of this moment of reflection for Democrats. How can we critique the Obama years and figure out where we could have done better, where we could have done more, without stepping on the rake of people saying, well, you're being too tough on Obama. He was being beat up by the Republicans. You don't get it.
Look, we got to think about how we go forward. You're right, what you said a few moments ago. This 2018 elections will determine the course of American history. No question in my mind about it. If the Democrats regain control of either the House or the Senate in a significant way, Trump's agenda will be ended. Because he needs both bodies, House and Senate, to support him. It will be over. And that is a huge thing, because I think this president is one of the most reactionary presidents in the history of this country. And what we need to do is not only stop what Trump is doing, we need to start talking to the American people, working people, not wealthy campaign contributors, about what their needs are.
Well, as we're trying to get ready to move forward, we still have to learn a few lessons. Looking back, what do you wish the DNC had done differently during 2016 so that your supporters might have felt more welcome and more like they were a respected part of the party?
Look, I don't want to, we're going forward and not back. In my campaign, as I think most people know, we had to take on everybody. We took on the entire corporate establishment. We took on the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. And I think the lesson of that, Van, I would hope is that the future of the Democratic Party has to be with grassroots politics, has to be with working people, has to be with young people, and not just wealthy campaign contributors. And by the way, I think that lesson is percolating right now. You're seeing many people coming forward and saying what I said, we're not going to take any corporate PACs, among other things.
One thing I would love to get your sense about is going forward. I'm not going to ask you anything about 2020 and your plans, but it does seem like it's becoming more about physical fitness. Biden says he wants to get into a fight with Trump. Trump thinks he can take Biden. Couldn't you take either one of them? I want to know. Tell the truth. Are you ready for it?
Both. Just not even. All right, but this is, among the major issues facing our country, probably is not a physical fight between Biden and Trump. Maybe wrong on that.
Yeah. Well, listen, I can't tell you how important it is to me to have you here. When you were coming up, you looked up to Eugene Debs, and he was the person who you saw as like the leading light for working people.
And Martin Luther King Jr.
Sure, Martin Luther King Jr., and you had a few other heroes. I just want you to know you got a whole generation, if not more, of young people who see you in that same light. Thank you for being on the Van Jones Show. Appreciate you very much. Thanks so much for being here. Look, when we get back, Van is back in the van. I'm driving around in Wisconsin with a bunch of voters. Wait till you hear what they got to say about the economy and what the impact of all these stories about porn star payouts could have on the midterm elections. I'm going to take you to Wisconsin when we get back.